you all for joining us today. My name is Nick Klein and I'm a project leader at Delivery Associates, and I am assisting the Clean Energy Buyers Institute, or SEBI, with today's webinar. This year, SEBI has hosted a series of Market 101 webinars, often affectionately called Sebinars. You may have joined their RTO Governance 101, Transmission 101, or Resource Adequacy 101. Today, we'll dive deeper in resource adequacy and provide a landscape of planning and roles across the Western United States. Today, I am joined by Jack Wadley, Senior Associate at the Clean Energy Buyers Institute, Vijay Satyal, Regional Energy Markets Manager at the Western Resource Advocates, and Sydney Welter, Energy Markets Policy Analyst at Western Resource Advocates. Before we get started, we have a few housekeeping items. Please feel free to send me your questions as a direct message as you have them or during the Q&A at the end. I'm here today to help moderate our chat, lead the Q&A, and share links to useful resources. I'm also on call to help you if you need any tech assistance. Finally, a recording of this webinar will be made available on the SEBI website. Excuse me for a moment here. Great. Now I would like to invite Jack to speak and share a bit more about what we will cover during today's webinar.
Thanks, Nick. And thank you all for being here today to join us. I'm really excited about the topics that we're going to cover today. As Nick said, my name is Jack Wadley. I'm a Senior Associate at the Clean Energy Buyers Institute, or SEBI, as well as the Clean Energy Buyers Association, or CEBA, for those that are not as familiar with our alphabet soup that we're usually playing with. My role at both of these organizations really focuses on Western markets and market design. And today I'm really excited for this webinar, which we hope can really provide the landscape of resource adequacy initiatives across the Western United States, as well as creating an open space for the CEBA and SEBI community to learn and ask questions. Hey, can you go back one, please? Back one more, please. So today I'm going to provide a little bit of context on both who CEBA and SEBI are and why we're focusing on the topic of resource adequacy. Then I'm going to hand it over to Vijay and Sydney, who are going to share some really interesting insights from a forthcoming resource focused on resource adequacy in the West. And then we're going to have some open time for Q&A, and Amanda Ormond, our SEBI project consultant, is going to join us during the discussion and help us answer some of the key questions that both the audience has, as well as questions that we think are really important to make sure that we cover. Next slide, please, Nick. So I mentioned CEBA and SEBI, and I think it's important to spend just a little bit of time, as we are relatively new organizations, as well as going through a thorough rebrand last year. The Clean Energy Buyers Institute, or SEBI, is a public benefit institute dedicated to solving the toughest market and policy barriers to achieving a carbon-free energy system. Our affiliate organization that you also may have heard of is the Clean Energy Buyers Association, or CEBA, which is a business association who activates a community of energy customers and partners to deploy market and policy solutions for a carbon-free energy system. Collectively, the two organizations are referred to as the Alliance and have a shared 2030 aspiration of a 90% carbon-free US electricity system, as well as a global community of energy customers driving clean energy deployment. We may mention some of CEBA's work in this webinar to showcase how customers are engaging on critical wholesale market topics like resource adequacy. Additionally, SEBI has written a primer covering the basics of RA and why large energy customers are focused on this issue. For anyone that hasn't had a chance to see those, Nick just dropped those links into the chat, and we would love for you to have those resources for yourselves. Additionally, please let us know if you are interested in learning more about CEBA's Western Working Group and the work that it does. And with that, I will pass it back to Nick to introduce the next section, and I'm really looking forward to the presentation. Thank you all.
Turn now to Vijay Satyal and the Western Resource Advocates, who is going to share how resource adequacy is currently planned in the West and the roles state regulators and utilities play in ensuring adequate resources to meet future demand.
Vijay, I think you might be muted.
Thanks, Nick, and also Jack for setting this up, and to Heidi, especially for this partnership we've had between WRA and SEBI. So let me just start with a very simple title we have for this project, and welcome everybody who I do not know on this call. My colleague Sydney and I look forward to making a presentation that speaks to RA in the West. And when this project was proposed to us, frankly, 8 months ago to 9 months ago, my response to Heidi was, this is a great idea and we would love to be part of it, but we would like to really first educate everybody on where things are, because that's where even WRA was. How is RA explored in the West? How is it managed? How is it regulated? How is it approved? So what you see is a project partnership that we're very grateful for. So next slide to whoever's running the slides. Thank you. I would like to, it would behoove me to not explain who WRA is. So WRA is a very unique organization in the West that Amanda Ormond is very familiar with. For many of you who know Amanda, and Heidi has come to appreciate, is a 30-year organization focused on the intermountain states, or I like to call the non-coastal states, focused on climate change, decarbonization, but with a very, we like to call a defensible, credible, and realistic form of pathway to decarbonization. We believe in evidence-based solutions. We also believe in holding regulators accountable and decision makers. So decision makers could be policymakers, it could be the big utilities, it could be board members of investment firms, it could be anybody who's responsible for energy assets that make decarbonization happen. I'm not going to go through the whole punchline, but you see the footprint that we work in. But the recent trends of regionalization are clearly going beyond these 6-7 states, and we're entering the coastal states in terms of policy and work. But we partner with our allies in those states where we are not directly in action. Next slide, please. Thank you. So where I'm going with this presentation is going to be a realization and a reminder from my time at WEC that I like to not lose, is the slide that reminds us of the Western Interconnection. Interconnectedness is the only solution. The only way we can make the Western Interconnection work well for resource adequacy, for resource sufficiency in the near time, for markets to work well, is we need to recognize we have 136,000 miles of existing footprint of transmission, catering to 80 million plus people. That has a footprint of 1.8 million square miles. You have a lot of hydro resources in the Northwest. You have a lot of solar resources in the Southwest. You have a lot of wind and some action-packed solar in the Intermountain, but you really still have a transmission system that is limited in its resources that it can bring to the table, as I like to call. Next slide, please. So let's get to resource adequacy. In the white paper that we're wrapping up, we've taken some time for various reasons, but we will have a white paper wrapped up in the next couple of weeks, but early January we'll release it, that SEBI can share with you all as customers, is that it in essence is a regulatory mechanism to ensure there is a planning procedure and framework. Procedure in terms of processes and a framework to make sure that energy resources meet the forecasted load, which is also called demand, in the bulk power system. We have many drivers that impact resource adequacy. Constantly updated load forecasts in near time right now. We have the validity of the data and the seasonality of it, the methods that are used and the counting associated with it. My colleague from the Northwest Energy Coalition, Fred Hoyt, has done a great job highlighting this concern that we need to not just look at the demand side, but look at the supply side of the problem. And to that end, we have been at WRA pushing and promoting demand side options to be kept in mind, and with customer behavior, like many of you. Big energy customers are huge players, influences on resource adequacy from the supply side scenario, but also from the demand side. And more importantly is the economic risk, recession, climate change, an earthquake, other problems. But the flip side is technology innovation that could play a role. So in other words, you have not just the definition of resource adequacy that everybody likes to talk about, but the impacting variables that we have to keep in mind. So we've kept that in mind as we try to summarize the high level keynote of what this paper captures. Next slide, please. So I want to get to the end state first. We have a regionalization trend happening in the West. I think a decarbonized grid is what everybody wants, but nobody wants it that is not reliable. Nobody wants it that's not efficient. So we want to make sure we're capturing all these scenarios. And in doing so, we want to make sure we are making sure consistent and clear price signals are sent to procure resources. We also want to make sure that situational awareness is maintained. In what resource adequacy really does is defer excessive investments in capacity that you may not need. And I think that's the key message that I would like to bring up. What else is meant by regionalization? For those of you who are new to this conversation, regionalization really talks about coordination for capacity sharing, like a carpooling. When you're carpooling to go into downtown, 6 people can get into one big van. That's carpooling. That's a very practical way of efficiently using travel means. Same goes with electrons being traveled across a certain point, that you use regionalization through coordination of capacity sharing. This is not the same as capacity markets and organized markets in the East, but it really calls for an awakening of making sure you're better using all efficient resources before you invest in a new gas plant, in a new peaker. So you cannot do this also without having a good governance structure that is fair, transparent, and in my language, a vessel that clarifies or informs and clarifies good guiding practices for rulemaking. In other words, if you want a good RA program in the West, or you want good resource adequacy sharing of information, you want transparency of market reporting and an independent valuation process. So I just want to clarify all this that we're setting up for, because if you do not have all this, you cannot have a functionally reliable and regionalized grid that does not capture resource adequacy and resource efficiency. Unless I see any questions, next slide, please. I see a slide. Thanks, Nick. Let's go to the next slide, please. So we made this presentation in 2020 in WRA, Western Resource Adequacy, because there was a lot of backlash on renewable energy resources, on clean energy options, conservation, that it did not work. That was the problem. So I want to share this with a visual I like. I'm a big visuals fan. This Perfect Storm movie with George Clooney, if any of you have seen, it shows there were technically 8 or 9 people on the boat, but the 6-8 people here are trying to look at the storm in front of them, and they're all focused in one direction and not understanding where all did the storm come from and why didn't they plan for it. Well, resource adequacy is a bit of a perfect storm. If you don't plan for it, you don't know what's coming at you, or you don't know what the multiple variables are. You are looking at, is this boat, the boat they are on, is that boat, IRP, an integrated resource plan, the right way to look at regional capacity needs? That was a fundamental flaw that everybody realized. And now you're seeing multiple peaks happen in a year. You're seeing seasonality of the load forecast that is not well appreciated. And what you're really understanding is what Cal ISO experienced in 2020. We have market structure and rules that are not helping the way the unintended impacts of the larger system are playing out. We do not understand the forced outages of the gas system, and we do not have a very good appreciation for the rules of the game for out-of-state renewable energy resources that can be brought to bear, that can be used and were not being able to be delivered. So, in other words, the August 2020 outages were the perfect lightning strike, perfect matchstick in the forest that triggered the RA conversation that we need to be aware of, and where we have come a long ways from. Within 2 years, we have done amazing work. and we will cover that in different ways. Next slide, please. To close it out before my colleague Sydney takes over, I credit Fred Hewitt here. He put this very good slide out in one of our larger conversations that we had, part of the Western P&G Environmental Advocates conversation called the WCA. And we had the slide out that really showed all the big lessons we need to learn from the problems of California and Texas. And if you look carefully in any of these boxes, you will not see renewable energy did not perform. You will not see the rules of the game were not clearly made clear. What you will see is climate change. What you will see is better appreciation of conservation and the need to recognize flexible demand as a resource. What you will see is a better need to count the resources in a way that's really complementary in value. What you will also see is the need for gas electric sectors to coordinate better. And of course, better coordination with our weather forecast. For God's sake, every morning we see the weather forecast and we still see it might change the next day. So, you know, I'm in Provence right now in France, by the way, on a vacation / keeping up on work. And 2 days before, we did not expect heavy rain and a hailstorm in Provence, but today I saw it this morning. Well, who knows? But the more important thing is reliability and coordinating with resilience of the grid. So these were lessons learned from California and Texas. And you've seen in the next 2 years since 2020, an amazing improvement in better appreciating where we need to go with the resource adequacy effort. However, we cannot ignore how we currently do RA, and that's what this presentation is about. What are the current ways in which RA is treated or treatment of RA is done in the West? Next slide, please. So that landed on a project we had between Heidi and I, and this slide simply shows you how significant a climate temperature change took place in 2020. And you can see the 2015 as well. And so I respect if you do not believe in climate change, what I want to highlight is that there is climate temperature variations happening at quite a significant deviations that are changing even during the year and when in the year. So next slide. So the project we landed on, Heidi and I brainstormed, was WRA will step in, and my apologies for a double typo A, even if you didn't see it, I'm calling it out, is a landscape setting project to look at how RA is currently done. We wanted to do this project keeping in mind the West has long lacked a regional RA coordination effort. And when we embarked on this brainstorming project late 2020, early 2021, the Western Resource Adequacy Program was already underway. WRA and our allies in the Northwest have been significantly involved in it, and we will touch on that later. But the approach we took for this project was threefold. We focused on the WEC, the public marketing agencies like WAPA and BPA. We focused on the IRP approach, that's a state level IRP, and a multi-state IRP approach. And we close out with the WRAP, the Western Resource Adequacy Program, not the wrap that you have like a chicken wrap or a beef wrap or a veggie wrap, but you know, just for perspective here. The other thing we tried to keep in mind was we granulated. We focused on the jurisdictional scope in terms of the scope and the authority. We also focused on the framework and the tools. And we in no way here want to make judgments or try to recommend which RA structure is better than the other, but we recognize that different energy customers are having different ways of leveraging resources to make procurement decisions for their buyers and their energy needs. Next slide, please. So I'm going to give it over to Sydney here, who will help walk through 3 or 4 of these, I like to call dimensions of RA determination. And we have a consistent approach we have used as scope and authority and the approach and tools. So Sydney, if you don't mind, and thank you.
Thanks, Vijay. Yes, I'm going to share observations of the various resource adequacy authorities and approaches in the West. There might be some technical detail in the slides, and if you don't want to get into the nitty-gritty, the key thing here to understand is just that there are many different levels of authority over resource adequacy in the West, state, regional, and federal, with different degrees of authority. So whether that an entity is acting in an advisory role on resource adequacy, or whether something is a regulatory mandate for a utility. So I'm going to start with the Western Electricity Coordinating Council, which is authorized to ensure reliability of the Western Interconnection, our Western grid. And for a few decades, the North American Electric Reliability Corporation has produced an annual resource adequacy reliability assessment, this long-term reliability assessment, LTRA. However, in the past few years, WEC has produced their own supplemental report to that, the Western Assessment of Resource Adequacy, which does a Western sub-region analysis. So just looking at the Southwest, for example. And these assessments are deterministic and probabilistic scenario analyses for energy. And what the WORA does is walk through a few different possible situational cases for the Western interconnection. So the expected supply and demand of electricity, or a high demand scenario, or if there were a major drought in the West, what reliability would be expected. So they have their own model for doing this analysis, and these reports are guiding documents to understand the ability of the Western grid to meet expected demand for the next decade. So this is one kind of advisory study that is done to support the Western grid. Next slide, please. Next, we have federal power marketing agencies, or PMAs. These are overseen by the Department of Energy and operate all of the federal hydroelectric dams. So we have two major power marketing agencies in the West, the Bonneville Power Administration, BPA, and the Western Area Power Administration, WAPA. And PMA long-term firm customers are required to submit resource plans every 5 years per federal policy. However, on a state-by-state basis, there are different requirements for utility customers of PMAs. So things really vary, but these long-term firm power customers do submit a plan every 5 years. And then each PMA has customer classes with requirements on what is attributable to RA designation for resources. And then FERC also approves rates that impact resource adequacy plans. So just another construct in an area of greater federal oversight over resource adequacy in the West. Then we're going to look at state level resource adequacy, which typically takes the form of IRPs, integrated resource planning. And these really look different state to state. So utilities have different requirements depending on what state they are in. And I have a nice visual on the next slide that I'll show in a moment that walks through the typical steps of an IRP. But typically, IRPs are submitted by utilities that are looking forward 10 to 20 years with different timeframes for when that has to be submitted to the appropriate state utility commission. So I'll just give an example. In Arizona, covered utilities need to submit a 15-year resource plan every other year to the Arizona Corporation Commission, the utility commission in Arizona. So it looks different state to state, but these IRPs can be a key part of achieving state energy goals, such as emission reduction policies, et cetera. But overall, they are a plan under different conditions to ensure reliability for each utility in each state. But if we go to the next slide, I have a visual that better explains this. So I'll just walk through these steps here. Again, things differ state to state, but generally, when utilities are submitting a state IRP, they are developing demand forecast and reviewing existing resources, identifying any regulatory requirements, developing different resource portfolios using modeling tools, comparing how portfolios perform under a variety of possible futures, possible scenarios for supply and demand and other impacting factors. Then they select a preferred portfolio and they file that plan and any supporting documents to commission. So generally, this is what the process looks like state to state. And we can go to the next slide. Things do get a little interesting when we get into multi-state utilities. So Pacificor, for example, operates in 6 different states: Utah, Oregon, Wyoming, Washington, Idaho, and California. Things look a little different for a utility that covers such a large footprint, but something key to note is that actually, with the exception of California, the IRP is not even approved by state regulatory commissions, but it is acknowledged, which is an even lower bar for approval. So Pacificor in the West with 5 of the 6 utility commissions for the states in which it operates, quite a low bar for its integrated resource plan. However, in general, these are the Pacificor IRPs operate on a 20-year planning period and demonstrate that preferred portfolio that we talked about on the previous slide of supply and demand side resources to meet need and any given action steps, and in order to maintain least cost, least risk in future planning. And typically Pacificor has its own kind of unique stakeholder process to give feedback on these IRPs, but bottom line, things get a little more complicated for utilities operating in multiple states. And we can go to the next slide. So I'm going to start to transition here to talking about a big Western resource adequacy new program that is in development right now, and that is where I'll pass things back to Vijay. But overall, IRPs are a critical way for utilities to cover their bases, so to speak, ensure they are meeting capacity needs without excessive build out of generation for some times of the year. And the Western Power Pool has created a new RA program for to supplement state by state resource adequacy work. So we can go to the next slide. And actually here, I'd like to switch things back to Vijay. It ties well to what he brought up earlier, some of the reliability crises that the West has faced in the past few years have led to a new resource adequacy program in the West operated by the Western Power Pool. And I'm going to let Vijay speak about that program with you all.
So thank you. Thanks, Sydney. That was perfect. Great. So before I get into the slide, I want to highlight something to you that almost often significant advances in regional coordination happens through policy adaptation to crisis. So I go from the last bullet up. What we had was the August 2020 heat storm events in the larger West, not just California, across Southwest Arizona, New Mexico, coming into Utah. And then we had an early winter storm in Portland, Oregon, and then up into the Northwest. And then it hit the winter storm in Texas and New Mexico and Colorado. And that really shook the community up of the industry plan, a community of planners in the energy industry. And what you see is a response to a crisis. And that really rose a lot of the industry leaders in the energy community to recommend that we need to really recognize a very big problem, which was already recognized 3 years ago, by the way, in 2019 by the Northwest Power Pool, is that we need to consider a resource adequacy program that covers the gamut and explores a way to manage the capacity needs so we don't have a last minute crisis and we're not suddenly asking ratepayers to pay for big investments in energy capacity and deal with unexpected blackouts and loss of load that you cannot plan for. So welcome to the birth of the Western Resource Adequacy Program. We are very lucky in the West. I've had the pleasure of knowing Sarah Edmonds for 8-10 years now. When I was in Oregon Energy Office, she was at Pacifico. She's been around the block. She is the CEO of the Western Resource Adequacy Program. The Northwest Power Pool rebranded under the board to become the Western Power Pool. WRA, an ally in the public interest community, worked very hard in making sure the board was independent, partnering with Northwest Energy Coalition and Renewable Northwest that are now involved in the committee design. Next slide, please. So what you really have is the recognition by the WRAP that we need to create a Western Power Pool program, like a cooperative of power companies that will manage and maintain resources forward-looking, 6 months out, 9 months out, and plan for capacity sharing. So it's literally like a carpool of resources 6 months out, 9 months out, and planning to prepare to deal with load forecasts and load forecast changes, so you are not having excessive build out of generation. That has often resulted in ratepayer cost increases, has often resulted in stranded cost eventually, and assets that you've not been able to fully use. The other significant thing that the Western Power Pool program did, we commend them highly for, is truly creating an independent governance program and having a list of nominees for their board that is part of the proposal to FERC that, if gets approved, will represent a consistent diversity of stakeholders, the utilities who serve energy customers like many of you or all of you, public interest organizations that are very valuable like us, clean energy advocates, conservation advocates, trade allies, transmission providers who make the electrons flow, and more importantly, even consumer advocates who ultimately have to weigh in state proceedings on what the energy bills will be. So in other words, the WRAP has really come along a long ways in a very quick time, but born out of crisis, responding very quickly, and trying to really have a thoughtful approach in managing capacity sharing in future. Keeping in mind and keeping in line with the day-ahead market that will be formed in the West. That is the SPP-led Markets Plus and the CalISO-led EDAM effort. Next slide, please. So I have two visuals to the right side. The one that everybody will like to easily understand is the top right one. The one that I like is the god of looking at the front and back. It's a Greek god that really emphasizes that nothing is perfect. You have to look front and back. So what you're really looking at here is a recognition by CalISO with the California PUC that we need a statewide approach to recognizing the summer problems of the heat storm events, so we don't bring the entire Western grid down to the knees. That's my words. There was a recognition by the California Energy Commission that need to engage in the WEC-RA processes. Welcome to the NERC LTRA. That I was quite involved in or being aware of when I worked at WEC, was a very siloed approach that the state agencies or IRPs were not fully informed. Only the utilities and the BAs, the balancing authorities, submitted their load forecasts, their demands for energy. More importantly, there is something called the Contingency Reserve Sharing Program called the CRSP that really lays out a sequential procedure of managing for load, conservation, and microgrids. And that was never really appreciated much, but now there's a lot more thought put into it between the different regional coordinators called the RCs. Last but not the least, which is the biggest strategic conversation that has come to play, is better recognizing the value and role of new resources. How can we charge dynamically customers for rates when they know they're not going to be using energy in the mornings or in the afternoons, or the vice versa, they might use more energy in the afternoon, but not in the evening. So can we have dynamic rate pricing? Market enhancements in terms of the rules of the game, and also better appreciating contingency that need to be managed. So these are the biggest lessons the last 2 years that have been learned. I would say the last 5 years, it's been ongoing, but they've been talked about and advocated for over 10, 20 years, but now it's all come to bear. Next slide, please. So WRA would like to propose these recommendations that will be in our paper as well, in partnership with input from SEBI, is that we think and we strongly support the RAP initiative to grow. It is a consistent way to have what I like to call the seatbelt approach. Any car you are in any state of the United States, you have to put your seatbelts on. It's a standard. It's a safety measure. It's a reliability measure. The reliability measure for having seatbelt on is having enough resource so you're not putting your foot on the pedal and you don't have gasoline. So before you check your gasoline, you put the seatbelt on, you see the odometer, you see your status, how your system is running. That's what the RAP initiative is, I'm hoping, will be. Second is any RA initiative should really quantify the benefits, not just looking at excess capacity build out that all regulators would like to see, but how can diverse energy resources be brought to bear and be valued appropriately? There's a lot of renewable energy resources that can play a big role. Are they being are they being truly measured well? And what are the qualitative benefits when you avoid curtailments? What are the benefits when CalISO, EDAM, and SPP Markets Plus go into play? We are going to enter a bifurcated market world. How are we going to measure and value the coordination between them? Another important aspect is the durability. How can an RA program be truly durable? How can it sustain itself over time and be adaptable for improvement? A WRA with Renewable Northwest and Northwest Energy Coalition, and even actually, I'm forgetting them, another organization played a very big role in promoting an independent evaluation of the program. You need to have an independent evaluation of the program to make sure that the resource adequacy projections, the forward showing program, and the projections for energy needs are truly being valued for what they are worth. And you're making sure that any penalties being assigned are appropriate for non-performance. Last but not the least is demand response. In the 2022, just last summer, 4 months ago, according to CalISO, 7,000 megawatts of demand response played a very big role because of conservation alerts and communication with customers. So you all as large customers have a very big role to play in demand response. And how you leverage your resources can make a very big deal, and you could be incentivized. So that's where we stand with our recommendations. And more importantly, this report that we are proposing that will wrap up with this presentation is really fundamentally directed at understanding how RA is currently done, which is unfortunately complicated in the West in terms of many pathways, but we think there is a future where consistency, coordination, and communication is going to be very key. And I think that that's the big message we want to convey. And Sydney and I are happy to take any questions we can, please. And thanks, Nick and Jack. I think this was our last slide. We have a contact information on the next slide for anybody who wishes to get to connect with us more, please.
Right. Well, with this, we are going to bring our Q&A section to the fore. We have a couple of questions that have come in the chat, so thank you for that. We're going to begin with a question from our friend Jack here. Jack, please take it away.
Thanks, Nick, and thank you, Vijay and Sydney, for that fantastic presentation. I'd like to kick off the Q&A section with one thing that I'm wondering about. And I'd like to ask that question to Amanda. And was wondering if she can talk a little bit more about how the RAP program will alter resource adequacy planning across the West now that we have this excellent baseline, and just thinking a little bit about next steps.
Yeah, thanks, Jack. One of the things I like to think about is how much change the RAP program is bringing. in the West, we have about 39 balancing authorities or utilities that are all doing their own planning. And so what it changes is it brings those all potentially into one planning regime. So when you think about how inefficient or inefficient that process is, one of the things the RAP program brings is efficiency. So we have now common metrics. So solar is planned, they get capacity credits by state or by utility, all in different ways. So now we might start using the same type of capacity credits. We expect that the information will make its way into the integrated resource plans that all the utilities do. So that's a first step. And then eventually, as we plan as a region, we will have more interconnectedness. So the impact of what's happening cannot really be understated, because the West has planned by itself these 39 different entities for decades and decades. So it's the first step to really bring folks together to plan coordinated. And that means we build less resources if we share more, and that means less consumer costs and better reliability, because we know who owns what, where the resources are. You really have to think about where we're starting to realize what a big change this is.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Amanda. Nick, I'm going to turn it back to you and let you kind of fire some questions that have come in to the speakers.
All right, we got a question in here, and Sydney, I think this one might be for you. Why is IRP planning different in each state?
Thanks for that question. So in short, a lot of different political governance factors are in play. So state statutes grant more or less authority to state utility commissions to regulate utilities. So that looks different state to state. Some states elect their utility commissioners, and some states they are appointed by the governor. So all of these things play into the level of stringency a state IRP process may have. And then from there, just depends state to state on what the minimum requirements of each plan are. So in summary, a lot of different political factors and level of importance each state places on this process.
For Vijay, where does WEC get the data it uses for its planning?
That is quite a question. That's a good one. So WEC gets historically its data based on the LTRA, long-term resource assessment, resource adequacy assessment procedure, part of the MOD requirements for planning, and that comes from the BAs directly. So if you are, let's say you're Amazon, I'm just picking on Amazon. I don't know anybody from Amazon here, please, or your Microsoft or your Facebook or you are Intel, anybody, but you have energy requirements or you're procuring, or you're a clean energy developer. And hi, Jeff. So if anybody is procuring from a utility and getting energy, that if that utility is a BA, they are providing data on their load forecast, their capacity needs for the next 5-10 years out to WEC. WEC puts all that together for all the BAs, the 37 BAs now, and does an assessment of it. Note, the WARA is an expansion improvement to the LTRA process with more probabilistic scenarios to looking at seasonality, looking at variations, looking at distribution curves that captures load forecast changes, looks at temperature changes and other things. So it's a much better granularization to the LTRA, but essentially you're looking at BAs providing data, not the individual utilities in all cases.
And if I can add to that, one of the challenges is, I think, Vijay, is that the balancing authorities, or kind of the utilities, they provide different quality of data, and they include different things. Sometimes they include energy efficiency, sometimes it doesn't. And so the quality of the data going in to the WEC planning can vary from utility to utility.
So Amanda, you're very right in the sense that each BA may have different ways of agreeing on what they collect as data from the utilities within their BA footprint. So what they consider demand response in their footprint may be different than BA2 that has different way of approaching conservation or demand response options or storage technologies or other things. So there is that situation of fuzziness in terms of the consistency of the data that the BAs collect, if I understood Amanda correctly, in what goes back to the WEC. And WEC can only go one level down to the BA level to review and validate, not 2 levels down. So that's why the RAP is a capacity forward sharing program that is asking everybody to come to the same school, have the same curriculum, and perform.
One more question, maybe two, if anyone has a burning question they want to share. Vijay, I think this one is for you as well. What is the difference between probabilistic and deterministic modeling?
Oh, I have the best example for it. A deterministic modeling will be what I was told 2 days ago in Provence, France, where I am, that we're going to have a 28 to 35 degree temperature Fahrenheit range. And probabilistic would be knowing that 28 to 35 degree would be every 1 hour, every 3 hours with rain or not. So you're adding granularity in each hour in terms of the energy demand or energy projection, but also bringing in the variation across how much data points you have to look at it. So probabilistic simply accounts for the availability of data at what level of time frame, but also how consistent that will be in terms of the credibility of the data you get. That's what probabilistic assessment is all about. And when you do that, you're capturing a larger stream of information or projection you get. Like what happened with the August 2020 heat storm. You had 3 or 5 weather forecasts that California was getting. What you didn't have is weather forecasts in other regions on what they were projecting. And if all of that was combined together, you create a truly probabilistic, what I like to call a multi-stochastic approach rather than a deterministic approach, which is you have 3 pointers, you have 5 data sources, and you make your best guess using an average methodology.
With that, I think we are done here. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you all to our presenters, Vijay and Sydney, Jack and Amanda for fielding some of these questions here. Please keep an eye out for a forthcoming primer that this webinar is based around. You can also register for the next installment of this webinar series, where we will discuss market options for resource adequacy coordination on December 19th between 3 and 4 p.m. I'm going to drop the link here in the chat so y'all can register for that. And with that, thank you and have a good rest of your day. Stay on for a little bit if there's any other questions or thoughts. But in the meantime, thank you very much.
Yep. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks everybody for joining. We look forward to seeing you next time.